Lisa Martinez gripped the steering wheel tighter as she turned onto the long gravel driveway that led to what would be their new home. The old Honda made grinding noises as it struggled up the uneven path filled with potholes and loose stones. Behind her in the back seat, she could hear her 16-year-old son Jake letting out another frustrated sigh while her 12-year-old daughter Emma pressed her face against the window, trying to get a better look at the house that appeared through the trees. The divorce papers had been final for 3 months now, and this was supposed to be their fresh start. Lisa had used every penny from the settlement to buy this foreclosed property at auction without even seeing it in person. She had only seen a few blurry photos online and read a brief description that mentioned it was built in 1892 and had been empty for almost 10 years. The price had been too good to pass up, even though it meant moving from their comfortable suburban life in Denver to this remote area in rural Montana where the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. As they rounded the final bend in the driveway, the house came into full view and Lisa felt her stomach drop. The Victorian-style building was much larger than she had expected, but it looked like it belonged in a horror movie rather than serving as someone's home. The white paint was peeling off in long strips that fluttered in the wind like dead skin. Several shutters hung at odd angles while others had fallen off completely and lay broken on the ground. The wraparound porch sagged in the middle and some of the wooden railings were missing entirely. Tall weeds had grown up around the foundation, and vines covered most of the first-floor windows. Jake finally broke the silence that had settled over them as they parked near the front steps. "Mom, this place looks like it's about to fall down, and I still don't understand why we had to move so far away from everything and everyone I know just because you and Dad couldn't figure out how to stay married." Lisa turned off the engine and took a deep breath before responding. "Jake, we've talked about this before, and you know that your father and I tried everything we could to make things work, but sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions, and this house represents a chance for us to start over and build something new together as a family." Emma bounced in her seat with excitement that seemed genuine, despite the condition of the house. "I think it looks like a castle, and just imagine how amazing it will be once we fix it up and make it beautiful again, and besides, we'll have so much more space than our old apartment, and maybe we can get a dog now that we have a big yard." They climbed out of the car and walked slowly toward the front door, while Lisa fumbled with the keys that the bank had given her. The wooden steps creaked loudly under their weight, and she noticed that several of the boards felt soft and spongy, which probably meant they would need to be replaced soon. The front door was solid oak and had probably been beautiful once, but now the varnish was cracked and faded and the brass hardware had turned green with age. Inside the house, the air smelled musty and stale like old books and damp earth. Their footsteps echoed in the empty rooms as they explored the ground floor, which included a large living room with a stone fireplace, a dining room with built-in cabinets, a kitchen that still had appliances from the 1970s, and a small bathroom that would definitely need major renovation. The wooden floors were covered with decades of dust and debris, but underneath, Lisa could see they were made of solid hardwood that might be worth refinishing. Emma ran ahead of them, up the wide staircase to explore the second floor, while Jake trudged behind looking like he would rather be anywhere else in the world. Lisa followed them up and found 4 bedrooms and another bathroom that was slightly larger than the one downstairs. Most of the rooms had old wallpaper that was peeling at the edges, and several windows had cracked glass that would need to be replaced before winter. After they had seen the main floors, Lisa remembered that the listing had mentioned a basement, so they found the narrow wooden stairs that led down from the kitchen. Jake had to use his phone flashlight because the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling had burned out long ago. The basement was larger than the footprint of the house above and had stone walls that felt cool and damp to the touch. Most of the space was filled with junk that previous owners had left behind, including old furniture, cardboard boxes that had fallen apart from moisture, rusty tools, and what looked like parts from several different cars. But as they made their way through the clutter, Emma noticed something unusual near the far wall, where a section seemed to be made of metal instead of stone. She called out to her mother and brother and pointed at what appeared to be a rectangular panel about 4 feet wide and 6 feet tall that had been partially hidden behind a stack of moldy cardboard boxes and an old wooden workbench. The surface of the panel was definitely metal, but it didn't look like steel or aluminum. Instead, it had a dark gray color that seemed to shift slightly in the dim light and was covered with intricate geometric patterns that hurt to look at for two. Long Lisa walked over and ran her hand across the smooth surface while Jake held his phone, light closer to get a better look. The patterns weren't carved into the metal but seemed to be part of the material itself, and they appeared to change depending on the angle from which they were viewed. Sometimes they looked like interconnected circles, while other times they resembled complex mathematical equations or star charts. Jake pointed out that the panel didn't seem to have any visible hinges or handles, which was strange if it was supposed to be some kind of door or access panel. Emma pressed her ear against the metal and claimed she could hear a very faint humming sound coming from the other side, but when Lisa and Jake listened, they couldn't hear anything unusual. They spent another hour exploring the basement and found several other odd features, including what appeared to be electrical wiring that was much newer than anything else in the house and ran directly to the mysterious metal panel. There were also strange scratches on the stone walls near the panel that looked almost like symbols or writing, but in no language any of them recognized. As they headed back upstairs, Lisa tried to convince herself that the previous owner had probably just been an eccentric inventor or artist who had installed some kind of unusual art piece in the basement, but something about the panel made her feel uneasy in a way she couldn't explain. Emma kept asking questions about who had made it and why it was hidden behind all that junk, while Jake seemed more interested in whether the house had decent internet connection for his gaming. That night they slept on air mattresses in the living room since their furniture wouldn't arrive until the following week. Lisa lay awake for hours listening to the old house settle and creak around them, while wondering if she had made a terrible mistake by moving her children to this isolated place. But when she finally drifted off to sleep, she dreamed of the metal panel in the basement and the geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. The moving truck arrived 3 days later, and Lisa felt relieved to finally have their furniture and belongings filling up the empty rooms of the old house. Jake had grudgingly helped carry boxes while Emma ran around excitedly deciding which bedroom would be hers and talking about all the improvements they could make. Lisa had chosen the master bedroom at the front of the house, which had large windows that let in plenty of morning light and gave her a view of the long driveway so she could see anyone approaching. They had spent most of the first week just getting settled and making the house livable, which meant cleaning decades of dust and grime from every surface and making lists of all the repairs that needed immediate attention. Lisa had called several contractors, but most of them seemed reluctant to drive all the way out to their remote location for anything less than a major job. She realized they would have to do much of the work themselves, which was both intimidating and exciting since none of them had much experience with home renovation. Jake had surprised her by showing genuine interest in some of the repair work, especially anything that involved tools or problem solving. He had always been good with his hands and figuring out how things worked, and Lisa wondered if this project might help him channel some of his anger about the divorce into something positive. Emma was more interested in the decorating aspects and had already filled several notebooks with sketches of how she wanted each room to look once they were finished. It was during their second week that the first strange incident occurred, and it happened completely by accident. Jake had been working in the basement trying to clear out more of the junk left behind by previous owners so they could properly assess what repairs were needed down there. He had borrowed a sledgehammer from their elderly neighbor, Mr. Peterson, who lived 5 miles down the road and seemed to be the only person in the area who wasn't surprised by their arrival. Jake was trying to demolish an old wooden workbench that was rotting and falling apart when he accidentally swung the hammer too wide and struck the mysterious metal panel they had discovered on their first day. Instead of the dull clang he expected, to hear the impact produced a deep resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the entire house. The sound was unlike anything any of them had heard before, and it made their teeth ache and their ears ring. Lisa and Emma came running down to the basement to see what had happened, and found Jake standing motionless in front of the panel with a shocked expression on his face. He explained what had occurred, and when Lisa examined the panel, she could see that the geometric patterns on its surface were now glowing very faintly with a soft blue light that pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. Emma reached out to touch the glowing patterns, but Lisa quickly grabbed her hand and pulled it away. Something about the panel's new behavior made her instinctively cautious, even though she couldn't explain why. The humming sound that Emma had claimed to hear before was now clearly audible to all of them, and seemed to be getting slightly louder with each pulse of light. That night, Emma began sleepwalking for the first time in her life. Lisa woke up around 3 in the morning to find her daughter's bed empty and discovered her standing at the top of the basement stairs, wearing only her pajamas and staring down into the darkness below. When Lisa gently shook her awake, Emma seemed confused and disoriented and claimed she had been dreaming about voices calling to her from deep underground. Emma described the voices as speaking in a language she didn't recognize but somehow understood, and they had been telling her about ancient secrets hidden beneath their house and inviting her to come down and learn the truth about humanity's real history. Lisa chalked it up to an overactive imagination, combined with the stress of moving to a new place, but she made sure to lock Emma's bedroom door from the outside for the rest of the night. The sleepwalking episodes continued for several more nights, and each time Emma would head straight for the basement stairs while muttering in what sounded like a completely foreign language. Lisa began sleeping on the couch in the living room so she could intercept her daughter before she reached the basement, but the whole situation was becoming increasingly disturbing. During the day, Emma seemed perfectly normal and claimed not to remember anything about the sleepwalking or the strange dreams that supposedly triggered it. But Lisa noticed that her daughter had become somewhat obsessed with the metal panel and would spend long periods sitting on the basement stairs just staring at it and listening to the humming sound that continued day and night. Jake had also become fixated on the panel, but in a different way. He spent hours researching the history of their house and the surrounding area, trying to find some explanation for the unusual installation. He discovered that the original owner had been a man named Henry Blackwood, who had built the house in 1892 and lived there alone until his mysterious disappearance in 1943. According to the local historical society, Blackwood had been some kind of inventor or scientist who worked on classified projects for the government during World War II. Neighbors from that time period remembered strange lights and sounds coming from his house at all hours and delivery trucks arriving with unmarked crates that required several men to carry into the basement. Jake found old newspaper articles that mentioned Blackwood's disappearance, but they raised more questions than they answered. The police had searched the house thoroughly and found no signs of violence or struggle, but all of his personal belongings and research materials were missing, as if he had simply vanished into thin air. The case was never solved, and eventually the house passed to distant relatives who had no interest in living there. Lisa tried contacting the estate lawyers who had handled the foreclosure sale to see if they had any additional information about the house's history, but they claimed that all records prior to 1950 had been lost in a fire at their offices. She also attempted to reach the previous owners, but discovered that the family had died in a car accident just 2 months before the bank foreclosed on the property. The more they learned about Henry Blackwood and his mysterious disappearance, the more convinced Lisa became that the metal panel in their basement was connected to whatever secret project he had been working on during the war. But she had no idea how to find out more information, or even who she could ask for help without sounding completely crazy. Meanwhile, the panel itself seemed to be becoming more active with each passing day. The humming sound grew louder and the geometric patterns glowed brighter, especially during the nighttime hours when Emma's sleepwalking episodes occurred. Jake claimed he could sometimes see additional patterns appearing and disappearing on the surface, as if the metal was displaying some kind of information that changed constantly. Lisa found herself torn between her natural curiosity about the mystery they had stumbled into and her parental instinct to protect her children from whatever unknown forces might be at work in their new home. She considered contacting the authorities, but realized she had no idea what agency would handle something like this, or whether they would even believe her story. The breaking point came when Emma's sleepwalking episode took a dangerous turn, and Lisa found her daughter standing directly in front of the metal panel, with her hand pressed against its surface while the geometric patterns flowed and shifted around her palm, like living things responding to her touch. Jake couldn't stop thinking about the metal panel and what might be hidden behind it. While his mother worried about Emma's sleepwalking and researched the house's history, he became obsessed with studying the geometric patterns that covered the surface. He spent hours in the basement with a notebook trying to sketch the designs and figure out if they followed any kind of logical sequence or mathematical principle. What fascinated him most was how the patterns seemed to change, depending on lighting conditions and viewing angle. Sometimes they appeared to be simple geometric shapes, while other times they looked like complex star charts or even mathematical equations that were beyond his understanding. He began to suspect that the patterns weren't just decorative, but served some kind of functional purpose like a code or interface. During one of his extended observation sessions, Jake noticed that certain patterns seemed to respond when he moved his hand close to the surface without actually touching it. The blue glow would intensify in specific areas as if the panel was somehow detecting his presence and reacting to it. This discovery led him to experiment with different hand positions and movements to see what kind of responses he could trigger. After several days of careful experimentation, Jake discovered that pressing on specific patterns in a particular sequence caused other sections of the panel to light up more brightly. It was like solving a puzzle where each correct move revealed the next step in the process. He began mapping out the sequences that produced the strongest reactions and noticed that they seemed to form a spiral pattern starting from the outer edges and working toward the center. Lisa had strictly forbidden anyone from touching the panel after finding Emma standing in front of it during her sleepwalking episode, but Jake's curiosity eventually overcame his obedience to his mother's rules. He waited until both Lisa and Emma were busy upstairs before attempting to complete the sequence he had been working on for days. Starting with the outermost pattern, Jake carefully pressed each symbol in the order he had determined through his observations. With each touch, the corresponding section glowed brighter and produced a soft musical tone that harmonized with the constant humming sound. As he approached the center of the sequence, the entire panel began to vibrate and the geometric pattern started moving faster, as if responding to his inputs with increasing excitement. When Jake pressed the final symbol at the very center of the panel, the entire surface suddenly went dark and silent for several seconds before erupting in brilliant blue light that filled the entire basement. The metal panel split down the middle with a soft, hissing sound and slid apart to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness beyond. Cool air flowed up from the hidden passage, carrying strange scents that reminded Jake of ozone and metal and something else he couldn't identify. He called out for his mother and sister, but the excitement in his voice brought them running down to the basement faster than he had expected. Lisa's expression went from confusion to shock to anger as she realized what her son had done despite her explicit instructions. Emma pushed past both of them to peer down the mysterious staircase with undisguised fascination. The steps appeared to be carved from the same dark stone as the basement walls, but they were much older and showed signs of wear that suggested they had been used frequently at some point in the distant past. Faint blue light emanated from somewhere below, providing just enough illumination to see the first dozen steps before the passage curved out of sight. Against her better judgment, but driven by the same curiosity that had led Jake to unlock the hidden door, Lisa decided they should explore the passage together, rather than allowing one of her children to venture down alone. She insisted on going first with Jake's phone flashlight, while her children followed close behind, ready to retreat quickly if they encountered anything dangerous. The staircase spiraled downward for what felt like several stories before, opening into a vast underground chamber that took their breath away. The space was much larger than the basement above, and appeared to have been carved from a single piece of dark stone that had veins of some crystalline material running through it. The walls curved upward to form a domed ceiling that was covered with more of the geometric patterns they had seen on the metal panel. But what dominated the chamber was the technology that filled the space. Crystalline structures grew from the floor like frozen trees, reaching toward the ceiling and pulsing with the same soft blue light they had seen upstairs. Banks of what appeared to be control panels lined the walls, covered with symbols and displays that showed constantly changing information in languages none of them could read. In the center of the chamber stood a circular platform raised about 3 feet off the ground, inaccessible by a narrow ramp. On the platform sat what could only be described as a control console, covered with the same geometric symbols they had become familiar with, but arranged in much more complex patterns. The console seemed to be the source of the humming sound they had been hearing, and it pulsed with light in rhythm with the crystalline structures around the room. Lisa found her voice first and whispered that they needed to leave immediately and contact the authorities, because they had obviously stumbled onto something far beyond their understanding. But even as she spoke, she couldn't tear her eyes away from the incredible sight before them. The chamber felt ancient in a way that made her think of archaeological discoveries and lost civilizations rather than anything that could have been built by Henry Blackwood in the 1940s. Jake was already moving toward the central console despite his mother's protests, drawn by an irresistible urge to understand how the technology worked. The symbols on the control surface were similar to those on the panel upstairs, but much more detailed and complex. Some appeared to be three-dimensional and seemed to float slightly above the surface, while others shifted and changed as he watched them. Emma stood transfixed by the crystalline structures that lined the walls. She claimed she could hear music coming from them like the humming sound, but with harmony and melody that was almost too beautiful to bear. She began walking toward one of the larger crystals, with her hand outstretched as if drawn by an invisible force. Lisa realized that both of her children were being affected by whatever power emanated from the chamber, and she quickly moved to position herself between them and the technology that surrounded them. But as she looked around the space more carefully, she began to notice details that made her question everything she thought she knew about their situation. The chamber showed signs of recent use despite being hidden behind a sealed panel for decades. The crystalline structures were free of dust, and the control surfaces looked as if they had been maintained and cleaned regularly. There were even what appeared to be modern electrical cables running along the walls and connecting to some of the alien technology. More disturbing were the personal items she spotted in alcoves around the chamber. A coffee cup that was still warm to the touch sat next to one of the control panels, and a jacket that looked like it belonged to a scientist or researcher hung from a hook near the entrance. These discoveries suggested that someone had been using this hidden facility recently and might return at any moment. As if summoned by her thoughts, Lisa heard footsteps on the spiral staircase behind them. Someone was coming down from the basement above, and there was nowhere for them to hide in the open chamber. She grabbed both of her children and pulled them behind one of the larger crystalline structures, just as a figure appeared at the bottom of the stairs. The figure that emerged from the staircase was not at all what Lisa had expected to see. Instead of an intruder or government agent, she found herself looking at an elderly man wearing a simple cardigan sweater and khaki pants, who appeared to be just as surprised to see them as they were to see him. He had white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and looked more like a retired college professor than someone involved in mysterious, underground technology. The man raised his hands in a peaceful gesture and spoke in a gentle voice that carried a slight accent Lisa couldn't quite place. He introduced himself as Dr. Alan Cooper and explained that he had been the caretaker of this facility for the past 30 years, ever since taking over the responsibility from his mentor who had worked with Henry Blackwood. During the original construction, Dr. Cooper seemed genuinely concerned about their presence in the chamber and asked if any of them had touched the central console or activated any of the systems. When Jake sheepishly admitted to opening the hidden panel upstairs, the old man's expression became more serious, and he quickly moved to check several of the displays around the room as if looking for signs of some kind of alert or activation. Emma stepped out from behind the crystal structure where they had been hiding and walked directly toward Dr. Cooper with the same dreamlike expression she had worn during her sleepwalking episodes. She began speaking in the strange language they had heard her use before, but this time Dr. Cooper's eyes widened with recognition, and he responded in what sounded like the same tongue. Lisa watched in amazement as her 12-year-old daughter carried on a conversation in a language she had never heard before with a man they had just met. The exchange lasted several minutes and seemed to involve complex concepts that Emma couldn't possibly understand. When they switched back to English, Dr. Cooper looked at Lisa with a mixture of respect and concern. He explained that Emma possessed a natural ability that was extremely rare among humans, and that her presence in the chamber had triggered automated systems that had been dormant for decades. The facility was much more than just a hidden room beneath their house and represented technology that originated from far beyond Earth. Henry Blackwood had been chosen as a guardian of this site because of his unique qualifications, but his disappearance in 1943 had left the responsibility to a secret organization that had been protecting such locations for generations. Dr. Cooper led them to the central console and began explaining the purpose of the chamber in terms that were simplified, but still almost impossible to believe. The facility was a communication relay that had been established thousands of years ago by an advanced alien civilization that called themselves the Architects. They had placed similar installations at strategic locations around the world as part of a long-term observation and contact protocol. The Architects had been monitoring human development for millennia, waiting for the species to reach sufficient technological and social maturity to join a galactic community of intelligent races. However, previous attempts at contact had been complicated by human governments who viewed alien technology as a threat to be controlled rather than a gift to be shared. The communication relays had been designed to activate only under specific circumstances involving humans who possessed certain psychological and genetic traits. Emma's natural empathic abilities and her family's recent experiences with loss and rebuilding had somehow triggered the activation protocols that Dr. Cooper had been monitoring for 3 decades without seeing any significant activity. The sleepwalking episodes had been caused by subconscious communication from the facility's artificial intelligence system, which had been trying to establish contact through the family member most capable of receiving its transmissions. Jake asked if the technology was dangerous, and Dr. Cooper assured him that the architects were peaceful beings who had no interest in conquest or domination. Their goal was to guide developing civilizations toward greater understanding and cooperation, while avoiding the mistakes that had led to the destruction of other species they had encountered. However, the communication process required willing participation and could not be forced on unwilling subjects. Lisa found herself struggling to process the enormity of what they were being told. The idea that aliens had been watching humanity for thousands of years and had built secret facilities like the one beneath her house seemed like something from a science fiction movie rather than real life. But the evidence was all around them in the form of technology that was clearly beyond anything humans could have created. Dr. Cooper seemed to understand her skepticism and activated one of the control panels to provide a demonstration of the facility's capabilities. The chamber filled with holographic displays showing star charts and what appeared to be real-time images of distant planets populated by beings that were clearly not human. Other displays showed mathematical equations and scientific data that represented knowledge far in advance of current human understanding. But the most compelling evidence came when Dr. Cooper activated the main communication array and a presence entered the chamber that was unlike anything any of them had ever experienced. It was not a physical being, but rather a consciousness that spoke directly into their minds using their own language and cultural references to make itself understood. The entity identified itself as Keeper Zeth-7 and explained that it was one of many architectural observers who had been assigned to monitor Earth's development. It expressed surprise and pleasure at making contact with Lisa's family and revealed that their particular circumstances had marked them as ideal candidates for serving as liaisons between humanity and the galactic community. Zeth-7 explained that the architects had been debating whether humanity was ready for contact, given the species' tendency toward violence and environmental destruction. Many observer councils had recommended continued isolation until humans could prove their capacity for peaceful cooperation. But the Martinez family's story of overcoming personal adversity while maintaining their bonds of love and loyalty represented the kind of resilience and adaptability that gave the architects hope for humanity's future. The communication session lasted for what felt like hours as Zeth-7 shared information about the galactic community and the challenges facing developing civilizations. Lisa learned that Earth was one of thousands of worlds under architect observation, and that only a small percentage of species successfully made the transition to galactic citizenship. Most either destroyed themselves through warfare or environmental collapse or proved too aggressive to be safely integrated with peaceful civilizations. Emma seemed to have a natural affinity for communicating with Zeth-7 and asked questions about architect society and technology with the curiosity of someone much older than her 12 years. Jake was more interested in the practical aspects of the situation and wanted to know what would happen next and whether their family would be able to continue living normal. Zeth-7 explained that the activation of the communication relay had been detected by monitoring stations throughout the galaxy and that Earth's status was now under active review by the Architect Council. The Martinez family would be expected to serve as ambassadors and prove that humanity deserved a place among the civilized species of the galaxy, but this responsibility would also place them in considerable danger from human governments and organizations who would not hesitate to use violence to control access to alien technology. Zeth-7's presence in the chamber became stronger as the communication session continued, and Lisa found herself experiencing something that felt like telepathic contact but was somehow much more intimate and complete. The architect consciousness shared not just words and concepts, but actual memories and experiences that allowed her to understand their perspective on humanity's place in the universe. Through these shared memories, Lisa saw civilizations that had successfully joined the galactic community and were now thriving members of an interstellar society based on cooperation and mutual benefit. She also witnessed the tragic histories of species that had failed the tests of maturity and either destroyed themselves or had to be contained to prevent them from threatening others. The weight of responsibility for humanity's future began to settle on her shoulders in a way that was both terrifying and inspiring. Zeth 7 explained that the architects had developed their observation and contact protocols over millions of years of experience with developing civilizations. They had learned that the most important indicator of a species' readiness for galactic citizenship was not technological advancement or intellectual capability, but rather their capacity for growth and adaptation in the face of adversity. The specific traits that marked a species as promising included the ability to maintain social bonds under stress, the willingness to sacrifice individual interests for the greater good, and most importantly, the capacity to learn from mistakes and change destructive behaviors. These qualities were often most clearly demonstrated by individuals who had faced personal crises and emerged stronger rather than broken. Lisa's divorce and her determination to rebuild her family's life despite financial hardship and social isolation had been monitored by architect observers as an example of the resilience that gave humanity hope. Her refusal to give up on her children's future, even when faced with seemingly impossible odds, demonstrated the kind of parental dedication that was considered essential for species survival. But individual examples were not enough to justify contact with an entire civilization. The architects needed proof that humans could extend their capacity for love and protection beyond their immediate family groups to encompass larger communities and eventually other species. This was where the test that the Martinez family would face became crucial, not just for their own future, but for all of humanity. Dr. Cooper had been quiet during most of the communication session, but now he spoke up to explain the practical aspects of what would happen next. The activation of the relay had triggered automated protocols that would soon bring unwanted attention from various human agencies and organizations. Within days or perhaps hours, their location would be discovered by satellites and monitoring equipment that tracked unusual energy signatures. Government agents would arrive with orders to secure the alien technology and likely take the family into custody for questioning and study. Military officials would want to weaponize anything they could understand, while intelligence agencies would seek to use the communication capabilities for espionage and control. None of these groups would have any interest in honoring the peaceful intentions behind the architect contact protocols. The test that humanity would face through the Martinez family's actions would determine whether the species could handle first contact responsibly or would simply repeat the patterns of violence and exploitation that had characterized most of human history. If Lisa and her children could demonstrate that humans were capable of protecting, rather than exploiting alien contact, then the architects might consider broader engagement with Earth's civilization. However, if the situation devolved into the kind of aggressive government takeover that Dr. Cooper expected, then the Architect Council would likely vote to classify humanity as too dangerous for contact, and Earth would be placed under indefinite quarantine. This would mean that humans would never be allowed to develop interstellar travel or communication and would remain isolated until they either evolved beyond their current limitations or destroyed themselves. Zeth 7 acknowledged that this placed an enormous burden on one family, but explained that the architects had learned through long experience that meaningful change usually began with small groups of individuals who were willing to take personal risks for larger principles. The Martinez family had already demonstrated their capacity for such sacrifice by choosing to start over in an isolated location rather than accept defeat after their personal crisis. Emma asked Zeth 7 whether the architects would help protect them from the government agents that Dr. Cooper expected to arrive soon. The alien consciousness explained that direct intervention was prohibited by their own laws governing contact with developing civilizations. The test had to be passed by humans acting according to their own values and choices, rather than under alien influence or protection. But Zeth-7 also revealed that the communication relay contained defensive capabilities that could be activated by humans who understood how to operate the systems. The technology had been designed to protect itself and its operators from exactly the kind of aggressive takeover that threatened to occur. Jake's natural aptitude for understanding the control interfaces meant that he might be able to access these defensive systems if necessary. Lisa realized that they were being asked to make a choice that would affect not just their own lives but the entire future relationship between humanity and advanced alien civilizations. If they chose to cooperate with whatever government agencies arrived, they might ensure their personal safety, but would likely doom humanity to continued isolation. If they chose to resist, they would be taking enormous personal risks for the sake of principles and possibilities that most people would consider purely theoretical. The weight of this responsibility felt overwhelming, but as Lisa looked at her children, she realized that the choice had already been made. Emma's natural empathy and Jake's protective instincts toward his family represented exactly the kind of human qualities that the architects were hoping to find. Their recent experiences with loss and rebuilding had taught them that sometimes taking risks for the sake of love was the only way to create a better future. Dr. Cooper activated additional displays around the chamber that showed real-time satellite surveillance of their location and confirmed that unknown aircraft were already approaching from multiple directions. The old man explained that he had been preparing for this moment for 30 years and had contingency plans in place, but warned that the next few hours would test all of their courage and determination. Zeth-7's presence began to fade as the architect consciousness prepared to return to its monitoring station, but left them with final words of encouragement and instruction. The alien entity emphasized that humanity's potential for greatness was real, and that the Martinez family had already proven themselves worthy of the trust being placed in them. But the ultimate test would come when they had to choose between personal safety and the greater good of their species. As the communication session ended and the chamber returned to its normal state of quiet humming, Lisa gathered her children close and tried to prepare them for what was coming. Outside, they could already hear the sound of helicopters approaching and knew that their old lives were about to end forever, regardless of what choices they made in the hours ahead. The sound of helicopters grew louder as Lisa and her children climbed the spiral staircase back to their basement, with Dr. Cooper following close behind. Through the small basement windows, they could see searchlights sweeping across their property and the dark shapes of aircraft hovering over the house. The old man quickly moved to a control panel near the metal door and began entering commands that caused the hidden entrance to seal itself and appear once again as a solid wall. Within minutes, they heard heavy footsteps on the floor above and voices shouting orders as armed personnel swept through their house room by room. Dr. Cooper motioned for them to remain silent and led them to a corner of the basement where old furniture and storage boxes provided some concealment. He whispered that the basement would be searched, but that the hidden chamber should remain undetected, as long as none of them accidentally triggered the opening sequence. The basement door opened and multiple figures in tactical gear descended the stairs, with weapons drawn and flashlights cutting through the darkness. Lisa pulled her children closer as the search team methodically examined every corner of the space, while speaking into radio headsets and reporting their findings to someone outside. The metal panel was inspected carefully but showed no signs of the geometric patterns or blue glow that had marked its active state after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. The search team declared the basement clear and returned upstairs. Through the ceiling, they could hear more personnel arriving and setting up what sounded like a command post in their living room. Generators were brought in to power equipment and communication arrays, while additional vehicles arrived carrying more agents and technical specialists. Dr. Cooper waited until the sounds of activity above had settled into a steady routine before activating a small device that projected a cone of silence around their hiding spot. He explained in whispers that the device would prevent their voices from being detected by electronic surveillance, but warned that they needed to remain hidden until he could assess the situation and determine who was in charge of the operation. As morning arrived, Lisa could see through the basement windows that their property was now surrounded by a complex of temporary structures including communication trailers, equipment storage units, and what appeared to be living quarters for a large number of personnel. Black SUVs and military vehicles formed a perimeter around the house while helicopters continued to patrol the airspace. Overhead, Dr. Cooper used another device to tap into the communication networks being used by the government forces, and they listened to radio traffic that revealed the scope of the operation. Multiple agencies were involved, including military intelligence, the Department of Energy, and several classified organizations that used only code names and numbers. The energy signature detected by satellites had triggered emergency protocols that brought together specialists from across the government. The person in charge of the operation was Agent Patricia Wells, who had arrived with orders from the highest levels of government to secure any alien technology and take into custody anyone who had been exposed to it. Lisa listened with growing dread as Agent Wells discussed plans for relocating the family to a secure facility where they could be studied and debriefed indefinitely. Jake whispered that they needed to fight back using the defensive systems that Zeth-7 had mentioned, but Dr. Cooper cautioned that activating the alien technology would immediately reveal the location of the hidden chamber and put them in even greater danger. The old man explained that he had been preparing for this situation for 30 years and had other options that might allow them to escape without triggering a military response. Emma had been unusually quiet since returning from the chamber below, but now she spoke up to say that she could still hear Zeth-7's voice in her mind and that the architect was offering guidance about how to handle the situation. Dr. Cooper looked surprised and explained that direct mental communication with the architects was extremely rare and usually only occurred during times of great crisis or importance. Through Emma's translation, they learned that Zeth-7 was monitoring the situation and had already begun alerting other architect observers about the aggressive human response to first contact. The alien consciousness was preparing to present the Martinez family's situation as evidence to the Galactic Council, but warned that time was running short before irreversible decisions would be made about humanity's future. The breakthrough came when Jake realized that the electrical systems of the house were connected to the hidden chamber through the mysterious wiring they had noticed earlier. If he could access the main electrical panel upstairs, he might be able to create a feedback loop that would disable all the electronic equipment the government teams were using without revealing the existence of the alien technology. Dr. Cooper was impressed by Jake's understanding of the integrated systems and helped him plan an approach that would make their interference look like a natural electromagnetic phenomenon rather than a deliberate act of sabotage. But reaching the electrical panel would require leaving their hiding place and moving through a house filled with armed agents who were under orders to detain anyone they found. Lisa realized that she would have to create a distraction that would draw the agents away from the basement long enough for Jake to reach the electrical systems. Against Dr. Cooper's advice, she decided to surrender herself to Agent Wells and claim that she was the only person who had discovered the unusual energy readings in the basement. Her children would remain hidden while she tried to negotiate for their safety. The plan required precise timing and depended on Jake's ability to interface with alien technology. He barely understood while under extreme pressure. Emma would serve as the communication link with Zeth-7 and relay instructions from the architect about how to activate the defensive systems without causing permanent damage to the government equipment or injuring the personnel above. As Lisa prepared to leave their hiding place and walk upstairs to surrender herself, she felt the weight of knowing that her decision would affect not just her family's fate but potentially the entire future of human contact with alien civilizations. If Jake succeeded in disabling the government equipment and they could escape the immediate threat, then they might have a chance to prove that humans could handle alien contact responsibly. But if their plan failed, they would likely spend the rest of their lives in government custody while military scientists attempted to weaponize technology they didn't understand and couldn't properly control. Even worse, the aggressive response to first contact would provide evidence to the Architect Council that humanity was indeed too dangerous and immature to be trusted with advanced technology. Dr. Cooper gave Lisa a small communication device that would allow her to signal Jake when the moment was right to begin his attempt to reach the electrical systems. The old man promised to protect her children, no matter what happened, and revealed that he had escape routes prepared that could get them to other safe houses if necessary. As Lisa climbed the basement stairs to face Agent Wells and the assembled government forces. She tried to channel the same determination that had gotten her through her divorce and led her to start over in this remote house. She had no way of knowing whether her sacrifice would save her children or doom them, but she knew that doing nothing would certainly result in the loss of everything they had worked to build together. Agent Patricia Wells was a stern woman in her 40s, who wore a dark suit and carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to getting immediate compliance with her orders. When Lisa emerged from the basement and announced her presence, Agent Wells quickly had her escorted to the living room, which had been converted into an interrogation center complete with recording equipment and multiple armed guards. Lisa sat in her own chair facing Agent Wells across her own coffee table, while technicians monitored devices that she assumed were designed to detect lies or stress responses. The agent's first questions focused on what Lisa had discovered in the basement and whether she had touched or activated any unusual technology. Lisa stuck to her planned story that she had only noticed strange energy readings and unusual humming sounds, but had been too frightened to investigate further. Agent Wells clearly didn't believe the simple explanation and began pressing Lisa with more detailed questions about the electromagnetic signatures that satellites had detected and the specific location within the house where the energy was strongest. The agent also wanted to know about Lisa's children and seemed suspicious about their absence from the house during such an important government operation. Meanwhile, in the basement, Jake waited for his mother's signal while studying the electrical panel and the strange wiring that connected their house to the alien technology below. Emma sat beside him with her eyes closed, maintaining mental contact with Zeth-7 and relaying information about the government forces above and the approaching deadline for the Architect Council's decision about humanity's future. Through Emma's translation, Jake learned that similar communication relays around the world were being monitored by other architect observers who were reporting on humanity's response to first contact. The aggressive military reaction to the energy signatures was being interpreted as evidence that humans would inevitably attempt to weaponize any alien technology they encountered rather than using it for peaceful purposes. Dr. Cooper had positioned himself near the hidden entrance to the chamber below and was monitoring the situation through devices that allowed him to intercept government communications. He warned Jake that additional technical teams were being flown in with equipment specifically designed to locate and analyze alien technology. Once these specialists arrived, it would become much more difficult to conceal the existence of the hidden chamber. The signal from Lisa came sooner than expected when Agent Wells decided to move the interrogation to the basement to investigate the source of the energy readings more directly. Lisa managed to activate her communication device while pretending to stumble on the stairs, and Jake immediately began his attempt to access the electrical systems and create the electromagnetic pulse that would disable the government equipment. Connecting with the alien technology through the house's electrical system proved more challenging than Jake had anticipated. The interface required not just technical understanding, but also a kind of mental harmony with the architect systems that Emma seemed to possess naturally. Jake found himself depending on his sister's guidance to navigate the complex patterns and sequences that controlled the defensive capabilities. As Jake worked to establish the connection, Agent Wells and her technical team entered the basement and began using sophisticated scanning equipment to map the electromagnetic fields around the hidden panel. Lisa watched with growing anxiety as the scans revealed energy patterns that clearly indicated the presence of advanced technology behind what appeared to be a solid wall. The breakthrough came when Emma was able to establish a three-way mental link between herself, Jake, and Zeth-7 that allowed the architect consciousness to guide Jake's interface with the defensive systems. The alien technology responded to their combined efforts by generating a controlled electromagnetic pulse that spread outward from the house in expanding waves. Every piece of electronic equipment within a mile radius suddenly failed as the pulse overloaded circuits and wiped memory systems. Vehicles stopped running. Helicopters were forced to make emergency landings, and all communication with outside agencies was severed. The government forces found themselves trapped at the site with no way to call for backup or report their situation to their superiors. Agent Wells and her team were thrown into confusion as their sophisticated scanning equipment failed and emergency lighting systems activated throughout the house. In the chaos that followed, Lisa was able to slip away from her guards and return to the basement where her children and Dr. Cooper were preparing to evacuate through the hidden chamber. But Jake surprised everyone by announcing that he had no intention of running away from the situation they had created. The electromagnetic pulse had disabled the government equipment, but it had also attracted the attention of news media and civilian observers who had been monitoring the unusual military activity in the remote area. Jake realized that this was their opportunity to tell humanity's side of the story, before government officials could control the narrative. Emma agreed with her brother and revealed that Zeth-7 had shown her visions of what would happen if they simply disappeared like Henry Blackwood had decades earlier. The government would cover up the incident and continue their attempts to locate and weaponize alien technology, while the Architect Council would conclude that humans could not be trusted with the knowledge of galactic civilization. Dr. Cooper tried to convince them that escape was their only option, because the government would never allow them to speak publicly about their experiences with alien contact. But Lisa realized that her children were right, and that running away would only confirm the negative assessment of humanity that many Architect observers already held. Instead of fleeing, Lisa decided to use the communication relay to broadcast a message directly to the Architect Council, while simultaneously transmitting the same message to every news organization and social media platform on Earth. She would speak not as a government representative but as a mother protecting her children, and argue that humanity's instinct to defend family and community could be extended to protecting entire worlds and civilizations. The plan required activating the communication relay at full power, which would reveal the location of the hidden chamber to everyone present, including Agent Wells and her team. But it would also demonstrate that humans were capable of choosing cooperation over conflict, even when faced with overwhelming pressure from their own government. As news helicopters arrived to investigate the electromagnetic phenomenon, and crowds of curious civilians gathered at the perimeter of the military cordon, Lisa prepared to make the most important speech of her life. She knew that her words would be heard not just by the Architect Council, but by every human being on Earth, and that the future of both species might depend on her ability to convince them that love was stronger than fear. Emma and Jake stood beside their mother as she activated the communication relay, and the hidden chamber was revealed in all its alien glory to the astonished government agents who had been searching for it. The geometric patterns on the walls began to glow as Zeth-7's consciousness filled the space and prepared to broadcast Lisa's message across the galaxy to determine once and for all whether humanity deserved a place among the stars. The chamber filled with brilliant light as the communication relay activated at full power, and Lisa found herself connected not just to Zeth-7, but to a vast network of Architect consciousness that spanned the galaxy. Through this connection, she could sense the attention of hundreds of observer councils as they monitored humanity's first attempt at official galactic communication. She could also feel the transmission being broadcast simultaneously to every communication device on Earth, ensuring that her words would reach every human being regardless of government attempts at censorship. Lisa took a deep breath and began speaking directly to the Architect Council, while Agent Wells and her team watched in stunned silence from the entrance to the chamber. She acknowledged that humanity had many flaws and had made countless mistakes throughout its history, but argued that these same failures had taught humans valuable lessons about the importance of growth and redemption. She spoke about her own divorce and the way it had nearly destroyed her family, but had ultimately made them stronger and more committed to protecting each other. She explained that humans might be violent and chaotic by Architect standards, but that this same intensity of emotion also made them capable of extraordinary acts of love and sacrifice. The drive to protect family and community that had brought her to this isolated house with her children was the same instinct that would motivate humans to protect other species and worlds once they understood the larger context of galactic civilization. Emma stepped forward to add her own perspective as someone who had been able to communicate naturally with Architect technology. From their first encounter, she described the visions that Zeth-7 had shared with her of peaceful worlds, where different species worked together to solve problems and explore the universe. She argued that humanity's diversity and adaptability would make them valuable contributors to this galactic community, rather than threats to be contained. Jake spoke about his fascination with the alien technology and his determination to understand how it worked, not for the purpose of creating weapons, but because he genuinely wanted to learn and contribute to something larger than himself. He challenged the architect assumption that humans would inevitably try to weaponize advanced technology by pointing out that he had chosen to use the defensive systems to protect rather than attack, even when faced with overwhelming government force. Not the response from the Architect Council was immediate and overwhelming, as hundreds of voices joined the conversation to debate humanity's future. Lisa could sense that many observers had been moved by her family's story and were beginning to reconsider their negative assessment of human potential. But she could also feel resistance from other factions who pointed to the aggressive government response as evidence that humans were not ready for galactic citizenship. The debate might have continued indefinitely, but was interrupted by a development that no one had anticipated. Agent Wells stepped forward and removed her weapons while ordering her team to stand down and cease all attempts to secure the alien technology. She revealed that she had been listening to the global broadcast of the conversation and had been contacted by her superiors who were responding to massive public pressure for transparency and peaceful resolution. News organizations around the world were broadcasting live coverage of the communication session, and millions of people were calling their representatives demanding that the government abandon its aggressive approach and allow the Martinez family to continue serving as liaisons with the alien civilization. Social media platforms were flooded with messages of support for first contact and criticism of the military response that had nearly derailed humanity's chance for galactic citizenship. Agent Wells explained that the president himself had contacted her with orders to facilitate rather than interfere with the communication process. The electromagnetic pulse that had disabled their equipment had also attracted international attention, and several world leaders were demanding to be included in any negotiations with alien representatives. The situation had grown far beyond what any single government agency could control or contain. Dr. Cooper emerged from the shadows where he had been monitoring the situation and revealed his true identity as a member of an international organization that had been preparing for this moment for decades. He explained that there were similar communication relays at sites around the world and that other families with the right genetic and psychological profiles had been quietly identified and prepared to serve as ambassadors if the need arose. Zeth Seven's consciousness conveyed a sense of satisfaction and hope as the Architect Council reached its decision about humanity's future. The Martinez family's courage in choosing cooperation over self-preservation combined with the global human response demanding peaceful contact had convinced even the most skeptical observers that the species deserved a chance to prove itself on the galactic stage. But the architects were not naive about human nature, and the decision came with conditions designed to protect both humanity and the existing galactic community. Earth would be placed under protective observation with architect ships positioned throughout the solar system to monitor human activity and prevent any attempts to use alien technology for aggressive purposes. The Martinez family would serve as official ambassadors, but other qualified individuals would be trained to assist them as humanity gradually integrated into galactic society. Most importantly, humans would be required to demonstrate their commitment to peaceful cooperation by working together to solve Earth's environmental and social problems before being granted access to technologies that could be used for interstellar travel. The architects had learned from experience that species which could not achieve harmony on their homeworlds were unlikely to contribute positively to galactic civilization. The months that followed transformed not just the Martinez family's life, but the entire trajectory of human civilization. Their Victorian house became the unofficial embassy for human-architect relations, with a steady stream of diplomats, scientists, and journalists arriving to witness the ongoing communication sessions. Lisa found herself thrust into a role she had never imagined as she worked with world leaders to establish protocols for peaceful cooperation with alien civilizations. Jake discovered that his natural aptitude for architect technology made him invaluable as a translator and interface specialist. He was eventually accepted as one of the first human students at an off-world technical academy where he learned to operate systems that could manipulate matter and energy in ways that seemed like magic to human understanding. Emma's empathic abilities continued to develop, and she became essential for bridging the emotional gap between human and architect consciousness, Dr. Cooper revealed the existence of a global network of guardians who had been protecting communication sites for generations while waiting for humanity to reach sufficient maturity for open contact. These men and women emerged from decades of secrecy to help coordinate Earth's integration into galactic society and ensure that the transition proceeded smoothly without triggering the kind of panic or violence that had doomed other species. As Lisa stood on her front porch one evening, 6 months after that first contact, she looked up at stars that no longer seemed impossibly distant. Architect ships were visible as bright points of light moving across the sky in formations that spelled out messages of welcome and encouragement for the humans below. Her divorce had led her to a rundown house in Montana, but sometimes the most broken paths lead to the most extraordinary destinations. The Martinez family had renovated much more than just an old house during their time in Montana. They had renovated humanity's relationship with the universe itself and opened doorways to possibilities that previous generations could never have imagined. The future stretched ahead, filled with challenges and opportunities that would test everything humans thought they knew about themselves and their place among the stars.